No, they won't touch my grandson. The cry tore through the thin, frozen air of Yakutia at 71 degrees. Oksana, 97 years old, felt her blood run cold in her veins, but it wasn't from the chill. It was the 1,000 yellow eyes glinting in the darkness around her cabin, each one a promise of death. The deep growls, the wild scent, the scratching of claws on the snow. The horde of hungry leopards advanced, a sea of ravenous predators. Her only grandson, her heart, trembled behind her. Oksana stepped forward, a frail body against a brutal force, and what she did next would echo as a legend across the icy steppes. Oksana didn't hesitate. Her body, though bent by 97 winters, rose with a strength that came from a place far deeper than muscle, a place of memory, of lineage, of unconditional love. She turned slightly to Timur, her dark, wise eyes meeting those of her grandson, who watched her with a mixture of terror and childlike faith, an almost imperceptible nod, a silent promise that everything would be all right. And then she turned back to the darkness dotted with hungry eyes. There was no time for fear, only for action. Oksana closed her eyes for an instant, breathing in the biting air that burned her nostrils, and felt the voices of her ancestors whisper in her mind. They had faced even crueler winters, even more relentless beasts. Wisdom was not in books, but in blood, in the earth, in the echo of the icy winds. With an agile movement, surprising for her age, she grabbed a pair of dried reindeer antlers that adorned the cabin entrance, long used in hunting rituals. They wouldn't be weapons, but instruments. Her wrinkled yet firm fingers fumbled with the icy material. Timur, hidden behind her legs, felt the tremor running through his grandmother's body, but also the iron determination emanating from her. He squinted, trying to understand what his babushka would do. The leopards, sensing the prey's hesitation, advanced slowly, their soft paws almost inaudible in the fluffy snow. But the low, continuous growl was a menacing drumbeat in the night's silence. The smell of fresh meat and the boy's vulnerability were an irresistible invitation. One of the felines, larger and bolder than the others, stepped forward, its eyes fixed on Timur. It was then that Oksana acted. She raised the reindeer antlers, not to attack, but to create. With unexpected force, she struck them against each other, producing a dry, piercing sound that tore through the tundra's stillness. It was not a natural sound, and the leopards paused. Their ears turned towards the source of that strange noise, but this was only the beginning. The elder then opened her mouth, and from its depths, from her ancestral soul, a cry emerged. Not a shriek of panic, but a guttural howl, deep and resonant, that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. It was a sound that mimicked the lament of ancient snow spirits, an echo of the howling winds that shaped mountains and legends. Her voice, though hoarse with age, carried the strength of countless generations, the melody of a time when humans spoke the language of nature. The leopards, predators by instinct, were creatures of wild logic. That sound, that dissonant and powerful melody, didn't fit their patterns. They flinched, some taking a step back, their yellow eyes now expressing not just hunger, but a hint of confusion, of an ancestral doubt that Oksana's wisdom had awakened. The icy air seemed to vibrate with the ghostly melody the elder wove, an invisible yet palpable barrier between life and death. Timur felt the sound reverberate in his chest, and for an instant the image of his grandmother transformed into a mystical guardian, a legendary figure defying nature's fury with the strength of her indomitable spirit. Oksana's guttural howl was not just a sound, it was a tapestry of legends woven into the frigid air. She sustained it, modulating it, making it echo as if multiple ancient spirits were awakening in the tundra. The leopards, accustomed to silent hunting and darkness as their ally, were disoriented. Their pupils, previously fixed on their prey, now darted restlessly, trying to locate the source of that strange threat that neither smelled of flesh nor seemed to have physical form. Some sharper, more nervous growls escaped their throats, and the horde, which had previously advanced like a wave, now writhed in hesitation. Timur, pressing closer against his grandmother's legs, felt the sound's vibration course through his small body. He raised his head, looking at Oksana's wrinkled face. Her eyes were half closed, her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was an indomitable flame in them, a strength he had never seen before. She wasn't just howling, she was communicating with the very spirit of Yakutia, invoking a protection that went beyond human comprehension. Oksana knew that sound alone wouldn't be enough to disperse 1,000 predators. She needed something more, something that would strike their most primal senses. With a slow, calculated movement, she reached to the side of the cabin, where a small pot of seal blubber and a dry moss wick rested. With a quick, precise breath, she lit the wick, transforming it into a rudimentary torch. The flickering flame, though small, cast dancing shadows on the surrounding snow. The leopards reacted to the unexpected light with an even more pronounced retreat. Creatures of the night, the sudden light was an alien element in their hunting environment. But Oksana didn't stop there. Using the torch, she began to move in slow circles, dragging her feet through the soft snow. Each step raised a small cloud of ice crystals that, illuminated by the flame, seemed to shimmer and expand, creating the illusion of ghostly figures moving at the periphery of the feline's vision. Her body ached, every muscle protesting the effort, but the image of Timur, safe behind her, was her fuel. She transformed the torch into a brush, painting the air with light and shadow. The howl continued, now lower, more subtle, blending with the sound of the wind and the rustle of the snow. It was a symphony of disorientation. The leopards, who had previously seen an easy target, now saw a myriad of invisible and inaudible threats, a dance of ghosts in the darkness. They looked at each other, their tails swaying in confusion, hunger competing with a primal fear that was beginning to set in. Timur watched, mesmerized. The dancing shadows seemed to come alive, transforming his grandmother into a snow sorceress, controlling the elements. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, not from the cold, but from the courage radiating from Oksana. The horde, though still present, seemed less threatening now, as if his grandmother's magic had raised an invisible shield. The elder, her face marked by time and the elements, was the personification of resilience, an unbreakable and tireless barrier between her grandson and nature's fury. She knew the battle wasn't won, but the first blow, the blow of doubt, had been struck. Doubt had been struck, but the hunger of 1,000 predators was a formidable force. Oksana knew it wasn't enough to keep them at bay. She needed to disperse them, to completely break their resolve. Her eyes, despite the fatigue that carved deeper lines around them, swept the surroundings, searching for the next piece in her intricate dance of survival. The howl, now more a lament of the wind, continued to weave the illusion of invisible presences carried by the frigid air. With the torch still in hand, Oksana moved to the side of the cabin where a pile of dry hides and thin branches was stacked, ready to be used as fuel. With an effort that made her knees protest, she picked up one of the longest, thinnest branches. It wasn't a weapon, but an extension of her will. With the branch, she began to rhythmically beat the dry hides, creating a hollow, percussive sound that blended with the howl and the rustle of the snow. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed, irregular and unpredictable, like the footsteps of a gigantic, invisible creature slowly approaching. The already nervous leopards reacted with further retreat, their paws sinking into the snow. Their heads turned in all directions, trying to identify the origin of that new noise that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Timur, watching his grandmother, felt a shiver, not of fear, but of a strange admiration. His babushka seemed to be transforming, her frail figure gaining an aura of ancestral power. He saw determination in every movement, wisdom in every gesture. His small eyes, once filled with terror, now shone with nascent hope. Oksana, her face contorted with effort, felt the pain in her shoulders and back. But her love for Timur was a fire that burned stronger than the cold and exhaustion. She knew that every fiber of her being needed to resist for him, for their lineage. She could not fail. She then remembered an old trick taught by her own grandmother. There was a small shamanic drum made of reindeer hide stretched over a wooden hoop kept inside the cabin. It was a sacred object used only in important rituals. With a quick glance at Timur, she signaled for him to stay put, and with surprising agility, she slipped inside the cabin, grabbed the drum, and returned to the entrance. The leopards, seeing her disappear for a brief instant, showed a flicker of renewed audacity. Some took a step forward, their growls growing louder. But Oksana reappeared, the drum in her hands. With a firm movement, she began to beat the drum. It wasn't a constant rhythm, but irregular, strong, deep beats that seemed to imitate the heart of the tundra itself. Each beat was a miniature thunderclap, a pulse of power reverberating in the icy air. The sound of the drum, mixed with her howl and the beating of the branch on the hides, created a disorienting cacophony. The leopards, already on the verge of panic, couldn't bear it any longer. The sound was too much, the light was strange, the shadows danced like ghosts. It was a sensory invasion that defied their understanding of the world. One by one, the felines began to turn their backs, their movements hesitant at first, then more hurried. The horde, that menacing mass, began to fragment, to disperse. Oksana continued, beating the drum, howling, moving the torch. Her eyes watched each leopard that moved away, each shadow that dissolved into the darkness. The victory wasn't complete, but the tide was turning. A grandmother's love, a lifetime's wisdom, was slowly driving away 1,000 predators. The tundra, a silent witness, seemed to breathe with the relief that began to emerge in the hearts of the elder and her grandson. The tundra, a silent witness, seemed to breathe with the relief that began to emerge in the hearts of the elder and her grandson. Oksana, however, dared not relax. The horde had not yet completely dissolved. Some leopards, the hungriest or the most stubborn, still prowled in the shadows, their yellow eyes flickering like dying embers in the darkness. The elder felt the weight of each of her 97 years, a searing pain that climbed from her knees to the nape of her neck, but the image of Timur, her precious grandson, was a balm for her weary soul. She maintained the drum's rhythm, though the beats were now slower, more spaced out, each one requiring monumental effort. Her voice, hoarse and almost failing, still wove the ancestral lament, but it was a thin thread, about to break. The torch, with its flickering flame, felt too heavy in her wrinkled hand, and the circular movements that once created vibrant illusions were now just an exhausted shuffle. Timur, sensing the change in his grandmother's rhythm, peeked from behind her legs. He saw the cold sweat on her forehead, the uncontrollable tremor in her hands. His little heart tightened. He wanted to help, but didn't know how. One of the remaining leopards, a large male with a scar over its eye, let out a more audible growl, as if challenging the magic that kept it away. It took a step forward, and Oksana felt a chill run down her spine. It was the most dangerous moment, when doubt turned into despair, and hunger once again became the driving force. With a last gasp of strength, the elder raised the drum above her head and struck it with renewed ferocity, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night. The howl that followed was no longer a lament, but a war cry, a direct challenge to the wild. The scarred leopard paused, its eyes fixed on the frail figure that, for an instant, seemed to grow in stature, enveloped in an aura of ancestral fury. The sound was so powerful, so unexpected, that the feline hesitated. The doubt Oksana had planted blossomed into panic. It turned abruptly and fled, disappearing into the tundra's darkness, followed by the few that still resisted. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the wind's breath and Oksana's racing heart. She remained there for a long moment, the drum still raised, the torch almost extinguished. Her eyes swept the darkness, searching for any sign of return, but the tundra was empty, save for the paw prints in the snow. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, she lowered the drum and the torch, which fell softly onto the snow. Her body gave way, and she would have fallen had Timur not clung to her legs, offering a small but vital support. Oksana turned to her grandson, her eyes brimming with tears of exhaustion and relief. She knelt with difficulty, embracing the boy with all the strength she had left. The warmth of his small body was the greatest reward, the end of an icy terror. Timur, feeling his grandmother's tremor, nestled into her arms, his face against her rough coat. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he knew his babushka had saved him. The smell of smoke and snow, mixed with his grandmother's familiar scent, was the smell of safety. Oksana closed her eyes, feeling the cold penetrate her bones now that the adrenaline had subsided. The cabin, once a refuge, now seemed like a palace of warmth and safety. She knew the night was still long and winter, relentless. But they were alive. The lineage was safe. Love, wisdom, and resilience had prevailed against 1,000 predators and the cruelest winter. She kissed the top of Timur's head, a silent promise that as long as there was life in her body, she would protect him. Oksana kissed the top of Timur's head, a silent promise that as long as there was life in her body, she would protect him. With a soft groan, she tried to hide from her grandson. She stood up, her knees cracking and her spine bent from effort and tension. Timur, still clinging to her leg, felt his grandmother's fragility, but also the persistence in her every movement. Oksana led him inside the small cabin, where the darkness was less oppressive than the night outside, and the air, though icy, didn't cut the skin like blades. The first task was fire. With trembling yet experienced hands, Oksana picked up a piece of dry birch and a flint. Each spark that flew was a small victory against the cold that still lingered within the wooden walls. Timur watched her in silence, his large, dark eyes reflecting the flickering light that finally erupted into a small flame. The warmth, still nascent, began to drive away the ice clinging to their clothes and their souls. Oksana sat on the floor, pulling Timur onto her lap. He nestled in, feeling the slow, tired rhythm of her heart. "It's all right, my little one," she whispered, her voice hoarse, running her wrinkled hand through her grandson's soft hair. "They're gone. For now." The last part, she thought to herself, was the brutal truth of the tundra. Survival was a daily battle, and today's victory didn't guarantee tomorrow's. But for Timur, those words were a balm. He raised his face, his eyes fixed on hers. "Babushka is strong," he said, his voice small but full of admiration. A faint, tired smile curved Oksana's lips. She hugged him closer, feeling gratitude and love overflow in her chest. That boy was her future, the reason for her struggle. The image of the 1,000 leopards still danced in her mind, their hungry eyes, their menacing growls. But she had faced them, not with brute force, but with the wisdom the earth and her ancestors had taught her. It was a wisdom of respect, of understanding nature's rhythms, of how to manipulate fear and confusion even in the fiercest predators. With a sigh, Oksana gently disentangled herself from Timur and shuffled to a corner of the cabin. She picked up an iron kettle and filled it with clean snow, placing it over the fire. The soft hiss of melting snow was a melody of life, a contrast to the oppressive silence that had dominated the night. As the water heated, she took a small bag of dried herbs, chamomile and birch leaves, harvested in the brief Yakutian summer. A warm tea, she knew, would calm their nerves and warm their bodies from the inside out. Timur watched his grandmother's every move, concern etched on his childlike face. He saw her hands tremble as she poured the herbs into the water, the way she leaned against the wall for balance. His babushka seemed so tired, so frail, yet so strong. He stood up and with hesitant steps went to her, offering her a small piece of reindeer hide to sit on. Oksana looked at him, and a glimmer of pride and tenderness lit her tear-filled eyes. "Thank you, my little warrior," she said, accepting the gesture with a nod. As the tea steeped, the fire's warmth filled the cabin, truly transforming it into a sanctuary. Oksana felt her muscles relax a little, the tension easing. She knew recovery would be slow, but the battle was won, and they were together. The connection between them, forged in terror and triumph, was now stronger than ever. Life in Yakutia was harsh, but the love between grandmother and grandson was a flame that would never extinguish, brighter than any star in the icy night. She picked up the 2 wooden mugs, filling them with the steaming tea. She offered one to Timur, who held it with both hands, feeling the warmth spread through his fingers. Oksana took a sip, the hot liquid sliding down her throat, a reminder that life, despite all adversities, still pulsed. Oksana took a sip, the hot liquid sliding down her throat, a reminder that life, despite all adversities, still pulsed. She felt the warmth spread through her body, but exhaustion was a heavy blanket that enveloped her, denser than her reindeer hide coat. Her eyes, previously fixed on the dancing flame, now closed for an instant, seeking brief refuge in the internal darkness. The drum, which moments before was an extension of her will, lay inert beside her, a silent testament to the battle fought. Timur, his hands firmly gripping his mug, watched his grandmother. He noticed how her shoulders slumped a little more, how the lines of worry on her face seemed to have deepened under the faint firelight. "Is babushka tired?" he asked, his soft voice, almost a whisper, breaking the cozy silence. Oksana opened her eyes, a faint smile curving her lips. She reached out her wrinkled hand and stroked Timur's hair. "Babushka is thinking, my little one. Thinking about how the sun will soon rise and bring a new day." She tried to infuse her voice with a calm she didn't fully feel. The truth was, although the leopards had retreated, the night had taken its toll. Every muscle ached, every bone protested. Ancestral wisdom had saved her, yes, but the fragility of age was an undeniable reality that now asserted itself with brutal force. She looked at her grandson, his face illuminated by the flame, and a pang of fear, different from the terror of the leopards, tightened her heart. How much longer could she be this barrier? How much longer would her body withstand the rigors of Yakutia and the threats it brought? She had promised to protect him, but the promise now seemed too heavy a burden for her aged shoulders. Timur noticed the change in his grandmother's gaze, a shadow that wasn't from the fire. He moved closer, nestling against her side, seeking and offering comfort in his small gesture. Oksana embraced him with one arm, feeling the fragility of her own body against the boy's vitality. The tea was finished, and the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows that seemed to tell tales of bravery and danger. Oksana was about to suggest Timur try to get some sleep when a subtle, almost inaudible sound tore through the cabin's quiet. It wasn't the wind's howl nor the rustle of snow. It was something different, something that didn't belong to the tundra's symphony, a dry snap, like branches being stepped on, but with a cadence that seemed deliberate. Oksana froze, her body stiffening. Her eyes widened, fixed on the hide door that separated the cabin's interior from the outside world. Timur, sensing his grandmother's sudden tension, raised his head, his eyes wide and curious. She tightened her embrace on Timur, a silent warning for him to be quiet. Her heart began to beat again, a frantic drum in her chest, but this time it wasn't from ancestral fury, but from a new and unknown apprehension. The leopards had dispersed, she was sure. Their tracks were clear in the snow, but what could this be? The sound repeated, closer now, and this time, Oksana could distinguish the unmistakable crunch of compacted snow under the weight of boots. Human boots. A wave of shock ran through Oksana. Humans? In that isolated vastness, in the middle of the darkest, coldest night after the leopard horde? It was unthinkable. Who could it be? A lost hunter, a traveler, or something more sinister? Yakutia was a place of solitude and silence, where human presence was rare and often fraught with meaning. She felt a chill that didn't come from the cold. The danger of the leopards was wild, predictable in its hunger. But human danger, that was an abyss of uncertainties. Timur, noticing the terror in his grandmother's eyes, pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Babushka, what is that?" he whispered, his voice laden with fear. Oksana didn't answer. She just pulled him closer, her body forming a protective shield. Her eyes swept the cabin, searching for something, anything, to face this new and unexpected threat. Ancestral wisdom had prepared her for the wild, but not for the arrival of an unknown human presence. The sound of the boots stopped right in front of the door. A heavy silence fell over the cabin, denser than the night itself. Oksana held her breath, her heart pounding. What would come next? The victory against the leopards now seemed a distant memory, overshadowed by the imminence of a new and mysterious, unexpected challenge. The silence that had settled after the boots stopped was abruptly broken when the high door was pushed inward with a dragging creak, letting in a gust of icy air that made the fire's flame flicker dangerously. Oksana squeezed Timur even tighter, her body tense as a bowstring. Her eyes, which had witnessed almost a century of winters and dangers, now saw two figures wrapped in heavy furs, covered in snow and ice, standing in the doorway. They were not the wild eyes of leopards, but human eyes, tired and desperate, that gazed at her. They were a man and a woman, both young, with faces marked by cold and exhaustion. The woman, with cracked and blue lips, held a small bundle against her chest, which Oksana, with a shiver, realized was a baby. The man, with a frozen beard, took a hesitant step inside, his heavy boots crushing the snow that had entered. "Lost," he managed to murmur, his voice hoarse and weak, his breath forming dense clouds in the air. "The storm. We couldn't find our way to the village." His eyes swept the cabin, fixing on the fire and then on Oksana and Timur, a mixture of relief and supplication in his gaze. Oksana felt a knot in her throat. Her mind, exhausted by the battle against the leopards, now struggled to process this new reality. More people, more mouths to feed, more bodies to warm, and a baby in Yakutia in the middle of a storm with lost parents. Her heart, which had hardened to face nature's fury, now opened to human vulnerability. The ancestral wisdom that had guided her in the fight against predators now whispered about the law of hospitality, the obligation to help those in need, especially in such an inhospitable place. Timur, who had huddled in his grandmother's arms, now peeked at the two figures. He had never seen strangers so closely. His curious eyes fixed on the small bundle in the woman's arms, and he felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. Oksana, with a sigh that seemed to come from her soul, loosened her embrace on Timur and, with a slow, painful gesture, pointed to the empty space near the fire. "Come in," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "The cold kills faster than hunger." She knew she was inviting a new challenge into her already fragile existence, but there was no other choice. Human connection, the essence of her lineage, demanded it. The young couple, with visible relief on their faces, shuffled inside, closing the high door behind them. The man, who identified himself as Boris with a last effort, pushed the snow out of the entrance with his foot. The woman, Anya, trembling uncontrollably, walked directly to the fire, her eyes fixed on the flame, as if it were the only source of life in the universe. She sat down, nestling the baby, whom she called Lena, even closer, trying to protect her from the cold that still clung to them. Oksana watched them, the lines of worry on her face deepening. She remembered when she was young, the long journeys, the danger of getting lost in the vast tundra. Life in Yakutia was a web of interdependence, where every lost soul was a reminder of everyone's fragility. She felt their pain, their exhaustion, the hope that now shone in their eyes. Boris and Anya told their story in fragments, between coughs and shivers. They had left their small village several days away in search of a dispersed reindeer herd. The storm caught them by surprise, and they lost their way. The baby was only a few months old. Oksana nodded, her mind already calculating. Provisions were scarce, space was small, but life was a gift, and the protection of new life even more so. She took the kettle from the fire and filled it again with snow, putting it on to heat. The chamomile and birch tea would be the first step to warm their bodies and calm their spirits. Timur, now more curious than scared, watched Lena, the small bundle sleeping deeply in Anya's arms. He had never seen such a tiny baby. The stranger's presence was a shock to his solitary world, but it also brought a new energy, a new dimension to his existence. Oksana, with a glance at Timur, felt a new wave of determination. The battle against the Leopards had been won, but the war for survival, for the continuity of the lineage, continued. And now she was not only protecting her grandson, but also welcoming new lives, an unexpected link in Yakutia's vast and relentless web. The cabin, once a sanctuary for two, now became a refuge for five, a silent testament to human resilience and the strength of connection amidst the cruelest winter. Oksana, feeling the cabin transform into a refuge for five, watched the newcomers, her body bent by the weight of responsibility and exhaustion. Her eyes scanned the small space, assessing provisions and warmth. Generosity was law in the tundra, but scarcity whispered. Boris and Anya, with Lena nestled, absorbed the fire's warmth. The tremors subsided. Color returned to their lips. Anya unbuttoned the baby's furs, revealing a tiny, rosy face that slept. Boris, with deep gratitude, extended his hand to Oksana, who held it weakly. "We can never thank you enough, babushka," he said, his voice hoarse but with emotion. The elder merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the flame. She took the empty kettle and filled it with snow, placing it over the fire. Tea was a balm, but it didn't fill the stomach. Her provisions of dried meat and smoked fish would have to be stretched. The image of the hungry leopards was still fresh, and now human hunger presented itself as a new, equally relentless challenge. She felt anxiety, but the voice of her ancestors, which spoke of sharing and community, was louder than fear. Timur, with curiosity overcoming fear, approached Anya and the baby. He knelt, his dark eyes fixed on Lena. He extended a hesitant finger, touching the tiny hand that stirred in her sleep. An innocent, pure smile lit his face. It was the first time he had seen a baby so closely, and the fragility of that new life captivated him. Anya, seeing the tenderness in the boy's gaze, smiled faintly. Boris watched the scene, a tear tracing his cheek. That small gesture from Timur was a reminder of the humanity they had feared losing. The cabin, though cramped, began to fill with a new energy, relief, gratitude, and fragile hope. Oksana, sitting near the fire, watched the family, feeling the warmth of the tea and her grandson's presence. The night was still long, but the oppressive silence had been replaced by the crackle of the fire, by whispers of thanks, and by the soft cry of the baby who now awoke, seeking her mother's breast. Anya, with slow movements, nursed Lena, an act of life that seemed to defy the death that had surrounded them. Oksana felt a knot in her throat. Ancestral wisdom was not just about surviving nature, but about nurturing life, the continuity of lineage. Her promise to protect Timur now extended to Boris, Anya, and little Lena, an invisible bond forged in adversity. It was a heavy burden, but also an unexpected blessing, a new purpose that ignited a flame in her aged chest. Yakutia demanded sacrifices and resilience, but offered moments of profound connection. The elder closed her eyes, feeling the strength that came from her indomitable spirit. Morning would bring new challenges, the need for food and the safety of everyone, especially little Lena. But for now, the cabin was a refuge, a small point of light in the relentless darkness of the Yakutian winter, warmed by human presence and the promise of an uncertain yet shared future. Oksana opened her eyes, a gleam of renewed determination in them. Life continued, and with it, the struggle. They would not be alone. Human connection, altruism and resilience were the true weapons against cold and hunger. She took Timur's hand, squeezing it gently, a silent promise that, together, they would face whatever came. The first rays of dawn, pale and distant, peeked through the cabin's cracks, tinting the interior with a bluish grey that revealed the intensity of the cold outside. Oksana felt the night's weight dissipate, replaced by the urgency of the new day. The fire, once vibrant, was now a handful of dying embers. The cabin, a refuge in the darkness, revealed its smallness and scarcity of resources under the faint light. Boris and Anya, exhausted, slept deeply, embraced. Lena nestled between them. Timur, holding his grandmother's hand, had succumbed to sleep, his breathing soft. Oksana watched them, a whirlwind of thoughts. The elder, with a silent groan, disentangled herself from Timur's hand and shuffled to the fire. With thin, dry twigs, she poked the embers, blowing gently until a small flame danced. Warmth was vital. Her provisions, limited for 2, would have to sustain 5. Dried reindeer meat, smoked fish, a few tubers and summer berries, everything seemed to dwindle. Hunger, a constant enemy, presented itself with a new face. She couldn't hunt. Her age and the baby made that unthinkable. The ancestral wisdom that had guided her against the leopards now needed to guide her in sharing and managing resources in extreme vulnerability. Boris was the first to wake, his eyes slowly opening to the cabin's reality. He sat up, rubbing his face with his gloved hands, a heavy sigh escaping. Seeing Oksana near the fire, he approached, his steps hesitant. "Babushka," he began, his voice hoarse from sleep and cold. We are a burden. We understand if you cannot keep us." Oksana turned, her tired but firm eyes meeting his. She shook her head. "No one is a burden in the tundra, my son. We are all one. We help each other, or winter takes us." Her voice, low, carried the authority of almost a century of life. She extended a piece of dried meat to him. "Eat. We need strength for the day." Anya and Lena woke shortly after. The baby's soft cry filled the cabin, a sound that, despite the situation, brought a strange sense of life and hope. Anya nursed Lena, her grateful eyes fixed on Oksana. Timur, who had also woken, watched the scene with childlike curiosity, his eyes fixed on little Lena. He moved closer to his grandmother sitting beside her, feeling the warmth of the fire and the presence of the new guests. Oksana took a small piece of smoked fish and offered it to Timur, who accepted it with a shy smile. The elder knew food was scarce, but sharing was an act of faith, an investment in the continuity of life. As they ate their meager breakfast, Oksana explained the situation to Boris and Anya, the leopard horde, the need to remain hidden until the predator's tracks dissipated, the distance to the nearest village. Boris listened attentively, his expression serious. We need to find our way back, babushka. Our village will be worried. Oksana nodded. Yes, but we cannot risk the baby's life in the deep cold and snow. We need to wait. And we need more food. She looked at Boris, an idea forming in her mind. He was young and strong, a hunter perhaps. The elder felt her exhaustion intensify, but the presence of the others, especially the baby, ignited a new flame in her chest. This was no longer a challenge just for her and Timur, it was for all of them. The cabin, once a solitary refuge, was now a small beacon of shared hope. Yakutia, with its relentless beauty and constant dangers, demanded her resilience and wisdom more than ever. Oksana, with a deep sigh, stood up. The day would be long, and the decisions difficult. But she was not alone. Human connection, forged in adversity, was the most powerful force they possessed against the cruelest winter. Oksana, with a deep sigh, stood up. The day would be long, and the decisions difficult, but she was not alone. Human connection, forged in adversity, was the most powerful force they possessed against the cruelest winter. She walked to the small opening that served as a window, scraping the ice with her fingernail to peer outside. The tundra stretched white and relentless under a grey sky that promised more snow. The wind howled, a mournful song that seemed to echo the worry in her chest. The leopards were gone, but cold and hunger were silent predators, equally lethal. Her wrinkled eyes swept the landscape, searching for signs, clues, anything ancestral wisdom could interpret. There were no fresh tracks of large animals, only untouched snow, an invitation to despair. She turned to Boris, who now held Lena in his arms. While Anya rested, exhausted, the young man seemed stronger, but worry still marked his face. "Boris, are you a hunter?" Oksana asked, her voice low but laden with expectation. Boris nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, babushka. I hunt reindeer and hares for my village." A glimmer of hope, fragile as thin ice, lit up in the elder's gaze. "Our provisions won't last for 5, Oksana continued, her voice serious. "We need food, but I cannot risk you alone in the tundra, not with the storm approaching and the leopards still nearby, though dispersed. We need a plan." She sat down again near the fire, gesturing for Boris to come closer. Timur, sensing the gravity of the conversation, nestled even closer to his grandmother, his eyes attentive. Oksana picked up a piece of charcoal and began to draw on the packed earth floor near the fire. Maps of the tundra, marking landmarks only she knew. A cluster of rocks, a bend in the frozen river, a hill where winds formed snow whirls. "Here," she pointed with a wrinkled finger, "there's a reindeer trail, ancient but still used. And there, a sheltered valley, where hares often take refuge. But the path is treacherous." Boris watched, fascinated by the precision of the improvised map and the elder's sharp memory. He felt the weight of responsibility, but also a wave of determination. "I can go, babushka. I am strong. I can bring food." Oksana shook her head slowly. "Not alone. The danger is not just the cold or hunger. It is loneliness, disorientation, and the hungry eyes that might still be lurking." She paused, her eyes fixed on the fire. "You will not hunt with brute force. You will hunt with your mind, with patience. You will use the wind, the sound, the shadow. You will become part of the tundra." She began to describe ancestral techniques, whispering how the wind could carry a hunter's scent, how the sound of a broken branch could alert prey miles away. She spoke of the importance of reading the snow, the patterns of the ice, the subtle signs nature offered. Boris listened, absorbing every word, every gesture. He realized that Oksana was not just giving instructions, but sharing a philosophy of life, a reverence for nature that he, as a hunter, had never understood so deeply. "You will not kill for sport, Boris," Oksana emphasized, her eyes meeting his. "You will kill to live, to sustain life, and you will thank the spirit of the prey for its sacrifice." Her voice was an echo of centuries, a bridge between past and present. Anya, who had woken and listened in silence, felt a shiver. Oksana's wisdom was palpable, almost mystical. Timur, in turn, saw his grandmother in a new way, not just the protector against the leopards, but the guardian of deep and essential knowledge. Boris nodded, the seriousness of the task weighing on him. "I understand, babushka. I will do what is necessary." He felt a new strength, a courage that came not just from his youth, but from the connection to the ancestral wisdom Oksana shared. Oksana picked up a small reindeer bone amulet carved with ancient symbols and handed it to Boris. "Take this. It's not magic, but a reminder that you carry the strength of your ancestors and the hope of all of us." Boris held the amulet, feeling its warmth in his palm. That small object was a link, a promise. The elder knew the journey would be dangerous, but hope, like the fire crackling in the cabin, needed to be fed. Their survival depended not only on Boris's physical strength, but on the wisdom she could impart and the faith they all placed in each other. The sun, still pale, began to rise higher, and the cabin, once a sanctuary for two, was now a center of planning, of hope, and of a human connection that defied Yakutia's relentlessness. Life continued to pulse, fragile yet indomitable. Oksana handed the amulet to Boris, feeling the weight of everyone's hope in the young man's palm. He held it with reverence, a tangible link to the wisdom she imparted. The sun, still pale, began to rise higher, and the cabin, once a sanctuary for two, was now a center of planning, of hope, and of a human connection that defied Yakutia's relentlessness. Life continued to pulse, fragile yet indomitable. Boris began to prepare, donning his thickest furs, checking his boot ties. Anya, with Lena asleep in her arms, watched him with tear-filled eyes. Fear was palpable, but the need for food was greater. "Come back to us," she whispered, her voice choked. Boris knelt, kissing his wife's forehead and then Lena's tiny hand. "I will return. Food for all of us." He looked at Timur, who watched him with an unusual seriousness for his age. "Take care of babushka, little hunter." Timur nodded, squeezing Oksana's hand. The elder, with a heavy heart, gave Boris a last look. "Remember the wind, Boris. It is your guide and your shield. Listen to the snow. It speaks. And trust your instinct. It is the voice of your ancestors." Boris nodded, taking a deep breath. He opened the hide door, and a gust of icy air invaded the cabin, making the flames dance. He turned one last time, his eyes meeting Oksana's, a silent promise exchanged. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white immensity. The cabin plunged into a heavy silence, only the crackle of the fire and Lena's soft breathing breaking the quiet. Oksana sat down again, closing her eyes. Every fiber of her being was with Boris, guiding him, protecting him. She imagined his every step in the snow, every glance he cast at the landscape. The tundra was a cruel mistress, and even ancestral wisdom could not guarantee safety. Boris advanced, the snow crunching under his boots. The cold was biting, but determination warmed him. He remembered Oksana's words, observing the wind that sculpted the snow dunes, feeling the direction from which the coldest air came. His eyes swept the horizon, searching for the subtle signs the elder had described, a patch of different color in the snow, the track of a small rodent, the way the dry bushes bent. Hours passed, the sun rose a little higher, but the sky remained gray and menacing. Boris found the reindeer trail Oksana had indicated. It was faint, almost erased by recent snow, but it was there. He followed it cautiously, his senses sharpened. The wind changed direction and Boris crouched using a small rise as cover. He knew that human scent, even faint, could alert animals. Suddenly a sound, a dry snap, distant. Boris froze. It wasn't the sound of a reindeer, it was something heavier, more deliberate. His eyes swept the landscape, his heart pounding. He remembered Oksana's warning about the hungry eyes that might still be lurking. A chill ran down his spine. Could it be one of the remaining leopards from the horde? He waited, motionless, the bone amulet clutched in his gloved hand. Silence returned, denser than before. Boris took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He couldn't afford to panic. His family's life depended on him. He concentrated, using Oksana's technique of listening to the snow, feeling the subtle vibrations of the ground. Nothing, only the wind and the cold. He decided that the risk of waiting was greater than that of moving forward. With renewed caution, Boris continued, staying alert to every shadow, every movement. He knew that hunting was a game of patience and cunning, and Oksana had given him the tools to win. Further on, in a sheltered valley, he saw them, not reindeer, but a group of snow hares, perfectly camouflaged against the white, yet revealed by their dark eyes and subtle movements. They were small, but they were food. Boris felt a wave of relief and determination. He moved like a shadow, using the terrain and the wind to his advantage, applying every teaching of the elder. The hunt wouldn't be easy, but the promise of life for Lena, Anya, and Timur, and his faith in Oksana propelled him. He was ready. Boris moved with the precision of a shadow, each step calculated, each breath controlled. Oksana's words echoed in his mind. Use the wind, the sound, the shadow. Become part of the tundra. He crouched, observing the snow hares, almost invisible in their white camouflage. The dry snap he had heard earlier remained a mystery. Perhaps it was a frozen branch breaking under the weight of the snow. Perhaps a small animal scurrying. He decided not to focus on it. Hunger was the more immediate predator. With the patience of an elder, Boris waited for the right moment. The wind, his ally, blew towards him, masking his scent. His eyes, trained for hunting, fixed on a hare slightly isolated from the group. He raised his bow, a simple piece of wood and sinew, and aimed. There was no room for hesitation. The arrow flew, a whisper in the icy air. The hare fell instantly without suffering. Boris felt a knot in his throat. He approached the animal, kneeling in the snow. "Thank you, spirit of the prey," he whispered, Oksana's words on his lips. "For your sacrifice, life continues." He repeated the gestures the elder had taught, a deep reverence for nature and the cycle of life. With the hare carefully tied, Boris began the journey back. The animal's weight was a welcome burden, a promise of warmth and food. The return journey seemed longer, the cold more intense, but the image of Anya, Lena, and Timur, and Oksana's firm gaze propelled him. He felt the amulet's strength in his hand, a constant reminder that he was not alone. In the cabin, the wait was a silent torture. Anya cradled Lena, who slept restlessly, while her eyes fixed on the hide door, searching for a sign. Oksana, sitting near the fire, maintained an outward calm, but her heart beat with the anxiety of 1,000 drums. She felt every gust of wind, every crack of ice, as if they were messages of Boris's fate. Timur, sensing the tension, nestled into his grandmother's lap, seeking comfort. "Will he come back, babushka?" he asked, his voice small. Oksana hugged him tight. "He will, my little one. Boris is strong, and the wisdom of our ancestors guides him." But doubt, a cold whisper, tried to infiltrate her certainty. Suddenly, a sound. Not the wind's howl, but a distinct crunch in the snow. Anya lifted her head, her heart pounding. Oksana, her aged eyes shining with new hope, turned to the door. The crunching grew closer, heavier, more rhythmic. The hide door opened slowly, and Boris appeared, covered in snow, but with an exhausted, victorious smile. On his back, the hair, a gift from the tundra. A sigh of relief filled the cabin. Anya ran to him, hugging him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're back," she sobbed. Boris held her close, feeling the warmth of his family. Oksana watched, a solitary tear tracing her own wrinkled cheek. Timur ran to Boris, clinging to his leg, his eyes shining with admiration. "You did it, Boris. You brought food." Boris knelt, embracing the boy. "Yes, little hunter, thanks to Babushka." He looked at Oksana, deep gratitude in his gaze. The elder merely nodded, her face illuminated by a tired but genuine smile. The hair was quickly prepared, and the smell of cooked meat began to fill the cabin, an aroma of life and hope. For the first time in days, they ate a substantial meal, warmth spreading through their bodies. The silence was no longer of tension, but of satiety and gratitude. Oksana felt the weight of her almost 100 years, but also a lightness in her spirit. The immediate conflicts had been resolved, hunger had been temporarily averted, the danger of the leopards avoided. Boris was safe, Timur's lineage and now Lena's were safe, at least for now. The cabin, once a solitary sanctuary, was now a pulsating home of life, a testament to the strength of human connection. Winter was still long, Yakutia relentless, but they had each other, and that, Oksana knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. Winter was still long, Yakutia relentless, but they had each other, and that, Oksana knew, was the most powerful weapon of all. The meal had provided warmth and sustenance, but more importantly, it had nourished their spirits. The small flame in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the cabin seem larger, more welcoming. Anya, with Lena asleep in her arms, felt the weight of gratitude in her chest, a warmth that spread beyond the meat she had just eaten and warmed her soul. Boris, beside her, held her hand tenderly, his eyes fixed on Oksana, who watched Timur play with a small piece of polished bone, a simple yet precious and meaningful toy. The elder smiled, a smile that rarely reached her wrinkled eyes, but which now illuminated her entire face. She saw not only her grandson, but the continuity of life, the promise of a future. That small group, gathered in the icy vastness, was living proof that life always finds a way, even in the most adverse conditions. The battle against the leopards had been a test of her ancestral wisdom, but the battle against hunger and despair was a test of her humanity, and they had passed. Oksana felt a pang of tiredness, but it was a good tiredness, the kind that comes after a hard-won victory. She had shared her knowledge, her home, her heart, and in return, she had received the promise of an extended family, of young hands to help, of voices to fill the silence. Lena, the little one, was a new link, a future painted with more colors than the monochrome of snow. "Winter is long," Oksana said, her voice soft yet firm, breaking the comfortable silence. "But spring always comes, and with it, the thaw, the paths open." Boris and Anya looked at her, hope igniting in their eyes. "We need to be patient and strong, together." Boris nodded, renewed confidence on his face. "We will be, Babushka. You showed us how." He remembered the hunting techniques, the reverence for the prey, but above all, the lesson that one is not alone. Oksana's wisdom was not just about surviving, but about living with purpose, with connection. Anya, with Lena nestled close, added, "We will never forget what you did for us. You gave us a second chance." The tears that now streamed were of relief and love. Timur, who had stopped playing, looked at his grandmother, then at Boris and Anya. He didn't understand all the words, but he felt the emotion in the air, the unity that enveloped them. For him, the cabin was now a place of soft laughter, shared warmth of stories told in whispers. His grandmother, once only his protector, was now the matriarch of a new family, a weaver of destinies. The fire in the hearth crackled, a pulsating, constant heart in the cabin. Outside, Yakutia continued to howl, cold and relentless, but inside, a new flame had been lit. A flame of hope, of family, of a legacy Oksana had secured. The lives of Timur, and now Lena, would be built upon the rock of ancestral wisdom and the warmth of deep human connection. The elder closed her eyes, feeling peace. Her mission was accomplished. The lineage would continue, strong and united, against any winter that came. The peace Oksana felt was not the stillness of an end, but the serenity of a new beginning. Her eyes, though closed, seemed to see beyond the cabin walls, to the long winter months that would still stretch ahead, and to the springs that would inevitably follow. The warmth of the fire and the softly breathing presence around her were the pillars of a new reality. She was no longer just Timur's solitary guardian. She was the matriarch of an expanded family, a vital link between past and future, weaving a tapestry of lives intertwined in Yakutia's frigid vastness. The following days unfolded with a different rhythm. The cabin, once an austere refuge, now overflowed with the energy of 5 lives. Anya and Boris, with gratitude etched in every gesture, took on daily tasks with fervent dedication. Boris, under Oksana's patient guidance, honed his hunting skills, not just for immediate survival, but with the reverence and cunning the elder taught. He learned to read the snow not merely as a hunter, but as a poet of the tundra, understanding its nuances, its whispers, its promises and dangers. Oksana watched him, a silent pride in her chest, seeing in him not just a son-in-law, but a worthy successor to the wisdom she carried. Anya, in turn, dedicated herself to Lena, cradling her daughter with soft songs while absorbing Oksana's lessons on food preparation, hide preservation, and the art of keeping warmth and hope alive in such a relentless environment. She saw in Oksana not just an elder, but an inexhaustible source of strength and resilience, a woman who had defied nature itself with the most powerful weapon: love. The conversations between the two women were long and deep, exchanging experiences, fears, and dreams, strengthening a bond that transcended age and kinship. Timur, with the insatiable curiosity of childhood, was the bridge between them all. He followed Boris on his short hunting expeditions, learning to identify tracks and feel the wind. With Oksana, he listened to the stories of ancestors, of snow spirits and animals, absorbing every word as if they were seeds planted in his young heart. And with Lena, he was the older brother, protective and caring, already understanding the weight of responsibility for the new life that had arrived. Little Lena's laughter, a rare and precious sound, echoed through the cabin, a melody of hope that chased away winter's melancholy. Oksana knew that life in Yakutia would never be easy. Cold, hunger, and nature's dangers would be constant companions. But now, they were not alone. The unity of that family, forged in adversity, was a shield stronger than any wall of ice. The bone amulet, which Boris now wore with reverence, was a symbol of that connection, a reminder that strength came not just from muscles, but from shared spirit. As the weeks passed, the cabin became a microcosm of resilience. Nights were filled with the fire's warmth, the aroma of simple stews, and the low voices of stories and plans. Oksana, seated in her place of honor, watched the family that had formed around her. Her eyes, once focused on the survival of a single grandson, now embraced the future of all of them. Lineage was not just of blood, but of spirit, of values passed down from generation to generation. Altruism, overcoming adversity, and unwavering faith in human connection. Spring, with its thaw and the promise of new life, seemed closer, not due to a change in climate, but to the renewal of hope in their hearts. Oksana closed her eyes again, this time with a smile on her lips. Her mission was not just accomplished, it had blossomed into something much greater.